life. Always look on the bright side of life. Some things in life are bad, they can really make you mad. Other things just make you swear and curse. When you're chewing on life's gristle, don't grumble, give a whistle. This'll help things turn out for the best. Always look on the bright side of life. Always look on the right side of life. If life seems jolly rotten, there's something you've forgotten, and that's to laugh and smile and dance and sing. When you're feeling in the dumps, don't be silly chumps. Just purse your lips and whistle, that's the thing. So always look on the bright side of death. Just before you draw your terminal breath. Life's a counterfeit when you look at it. Life's a laugh and death's the joke, it's true. You see, it's all a show. Keep them laughing as you go. Just remember the last laugh is on you. Always look on the bright side of life. And always look on the bright side of life. Always look on the bright side of life.
Hi, and welcome to Ward 13. I've got my orange jacket on. This is the jacket not of a sportscaster when I normally use it. We haven't done a baseball show in a while. But it is of an outside talker. Geez, I look terrible. I'm looking at myself, Brendan. Should I do that? I look out of focus. But an outside talker is what you actually, inside a carny, call a barker. And we are going to do a show, and it might last, I think it's going to last 2 shows, this week and next week, on one of the most transgressive films ever made, Tod Browning's Freaks. Peter, would you like to, Peter Silla is our guest.
Hello, and I am your guest. Yes, Freaks. John knew exactly who to call about this particular motion picture, and here I am to pontificate on all things freaky.
Oh, Brendan, that's not the one with him with the Freaks hat on. That's him as the baseball.
That's what you sent me.
Oh, the joys of ADHD, too. Do you think that background is the reason? Because I'm seeing all that's really bad, that everything's out of focus. What do you see, if you see anything? Brendan.
Who, me?
No, you don't see anything.
What?
Is everything look okay? Because as I'm looking in the monitor, everything looks really screwy. Well, Peter is also our baseball commentator, and that's the hat they got on for you right now, Peter. Because, I forgot to send I sent the wrong... Oh, there we go. Tod Browning's Freaks. First of all, Peter, since I forgot with my ADHD, I set everything to private instead of unlisted, and nobody got to see any of the clips, which we can have next week. Tell us about when I met you back like 1990, 1991, when we were working together in the Silicon Valley. You had a thing for what some people call very special people. What are very special people?
Well, freaks, mostly. That was a book that, came out, I don't know, 70s, 80s, and it was, just talked about, history's, famous freaks. But my love affair with freaks started with Freaks. I remember it was playing at the Orson Welles Cinema in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where I grew up. And and I'm in grade school, and, fifth grade, sixth grade, and this kid next to, hey, man, you got to see this movie, right? And, yeah, sure, and so we moseyed on over there, and, my life changed from that moment on,
Okay, now explain to people that were born, sometimes closer to the century than the half century, which we were, what the Orson Welles cinema was and what made it unique.
Well, the Orson Welles cinema was like right outside Harvard Square in Cambridge, and it used to show, it was kind of like cult cinema.
Art cinema.
A lot of foreign movies, a lot of vintage and just a lot of cult stuff, and, that was one of the first places I remember that showed midnight movies on weekends, and,
right.
It was the typical fare. But, yeah, Freaks was, on the particular day I went there, was running, and, it freaked me out. I had no idea that, such a motion picture had ever been made, let alone in 1932. So it definitely made an impression.
Now, as to explain to the younger audience, before video cassettes, you used to be theaters like the Orson Welles, which also showed what were called art films, foreign films. And there was the Harvard Square Theater, which was an old movie house that showed double bills that changed every day, which would be two classic films, or a popular film or a classic film, or that, like say, it would be Last Tango in Paris, which had been released, 7 years before, but which could still, because it wasn't available on cassette, people would come to see, and then they might put another Brando movie, like On the Waterfront with it, or something like that.
Yeah.
And that is, and then there were the theaters, the Bleecker Street Cinema in New York City, the Thalia, which is, I think, up at 92nd Street. If you were into cinema, these were the only theaters you could go to actually see movies that were uncut, that were no commercials, and were on a big screen. I didn't realize James Stewart was a great, great actor until I saw Vertigo on the big screen at the Stanford in Palo Alto. And then you start realizing, and I didn't really like Jimmy Cagney much, and but seeing James Cagney, who you were a great Cagney fan, and I started watching him, seeing him on a big screen, or Bogart on the big screen, was quite different than seeing it on a small screen. Somebody like Jimmy Stewart had such a subtle face, and he could show all these emotions that you couldn't see on a small screen. The thing about James Cagney was, it's like Orson Welles said, he shouldn't have been the great actor he is because he's so red hot. Where I always thought Bogart, who was supported him in some films, was kind of started out almost as a Cagney clone in the tough guy roles, in the sense that how many actors like after Brando were like Brandos, and ironically, on the big screen, that red, White Heat, which is it's probably your favorite movie, Jimmy Cagney, 1949.
Yeah.
It's just incredible.
I remember seeing that at the Stanford Theater too, and it's you're right. I mean, especially these classic actors who worked before television was even invented mostly.
Right.
They knew how to project, and they knew how they would be seen on a big screen, and they adjusted accordingly.
Right.
And sure, I mean, those are the greats. Cagney, Jimmy Stewart, Bogart, and and none of them were in Freaks. So I'm not sure we've digressed a bit. But
well, not really, because we're just setting this, for people that are younger. You could not see
we're setting the stage.
Right. Freaks was banned, folks. We'll talk about the background of Freaks, which goes back a decade before it was produced. It was the brainchild of probably the most famous Hollywood producer of all times, Irving Thalberg, who was so famous for his, quality pictures, the Greta Garbo and, is it Camellia and all those great movies. They were tasteful and everything. But, it was Irving Thalberg that wanted this movie made. And it was so shocking. It basically got banned. It was banned in many states because censorship was local in those days. People don't understand one of the reasons they have a code. There was a code in 1930 which wasn't that strict. And there was a stricter one in 34 for various reasons. Because when you set out a film, New York would cut it to pieces. Chicago would cut it to pieces. So you'd be sending out all these different things of a movie. And, yeah.
Thalberg didn't know what the hell he was talking about, for starters. Because,
about what?
I don't think he had a clue about, what he was getting into with Freaks. I think that they were just so enthralled with the great success of Tod Browning's Dracula the previous year. They told Browning pretty much, they wrote him a blank check pretty much and said, hey, and I'm sure, if anybody else on the planet besides Tod Browning was involved, this movie never would have been made.
That's right.
My impression of it anyway.
And you know why? We'll get to the thing. The big hit, other than Dracula, was Frankenstein. And Thalberg wanted a film that outdid Frankenstein, which was, and that was cut too, slightly, which really
when they
horrified.
Threw the girl into the lake, that didn't make it.
Right. Horror was a genre that, was in the silent films. And but it kind of exploded in 1930-31 when the Depression came along. And Irving Thalberg, before he was the boy genius of MGM, at 19 years old, became the boy genius of Universal under Carl Laemmle. And he is the one, he never took producer's credit. He's the one, Peter, that put that brought Tod Browning and Lon Chaney together. Now, Lon Chaney is a person that you'd only see maybe on TV you'd see Hunchback of Notre Dame. And they used to have 8 millimeter movies that you have on your 8 millimeter projector, about 6 minutes of classic films. I still have a High Noon in 6 minutes, and you'd watch them. This is before video cassettes. Talking about discovering great classic actors, Lon Chaney, in my opinion, other than Garbo, was the greatest actor of the silent screen. I mean, he was amazing what he could convey with his pantomime. We got to leave Charlie Chaplin out of that because he is, Charlie Chaplin, a world unto his own. But
Chaney grew up in a household. I believe both his parents were deaf.
Yes.
Is that correct? And so he just grew up learning how to make facial expressions and just express himself without words. And obviously that translated incredibly well to silent cinema.
Well, so him and Browning and Lon Chaney, who made movies at Universal when Irving Thalberg was there, and they were huge hits. Lon Chaney was one of the greatest. Was a superstar. The only bigger stars would have been Gloria not even bigger. Gloria Swanson, Rudolph Valentino, and John Gilbert, and then Garbo. He was that big, and he was a sensation. And he made films with Tod Browning that were quite grotesque. In The Penalty, he plays somebody with no legs. Then West of Zanzibar, he's a person that's disabled would be the word, after he throws himself desperately, after he was cuckolded by Lionel Barrymore, of all people. And so he plays the film, he goes from this professor in Paris to a ivory trader or something in Zanzibar with these twisted legs. And Cagney actually, James Cagney in The Man of 10,000 Faces in 1957, he actually had to play the scene. What was the movie? The Miracle? Is it The Miracle Man?
Oh, geez, I don't know, but it was...
Where he's twisted?
Yeah, Cagney did the biopic of Chaney, and it was Man of a Thousand Faces, late 50s. And,
57.
I remember reading Cagney's memoir, and he was amazed at, what Chaney had to go through in these roles. It's important to say that, Lon Chaney, as great as he wasn't the typical leading man.
No, he was not attractive.
He specialized in,
freaks.
Really freaky characters.
Freaks.
There was usually at least one limb missing, or he was just like a sideshow come to life. And you're right. Tod Browning, I think, brought out the best in him too.
Right. And these were huge hits.
My favorite of his in the silent era was The Unknown.
Right.
And
which
unbelievable.
Just to go back to James Cagney there's a famous scene at the climax of The Miracle Man, which is about a fake, miracle healer, and Chaney played the person that played a disabled person and then is cured. And they always thought the scene was lost, but I think they found it about 30 years ago. And Cagney had to recreate it himself, where his legs are all twisted and he's on the crutches. And coming and watching it's just amazing. But talk about The Unknown, which came out in 1927. That was an MGM movie when Tod Browning moved over with Chaney, who was MGM's biggest star after Gilbert, along with Gilbert and John Gilbert and Greta Garbo. So tell the folks what's so unique about Lon Chaney's characterization of Alonzo, who works in a circus.
Alonzo. He is a criminal on the lam, and what he decides to do is hide out in a traveling circus as an armless knife thrower.
Right.
And so that was basically, he went incognito as an armless knife thrower, and it was important that everybody else in the circus really think that he didn't have any arms. And, he had a little sidekick who was his assistant who helped him kind of bind his arms in a shirt every day. And but the thing that's amazing about this movie is that it had a love interest in Joan Crawford, and of course Chaney falls in love with her, but he can't touch her because he's not supposed to have any arms, and that was okay with her because she was tired of sleazy men's advances. I
think she'd been molested or something.
There is a twist later on which is just unbelievably, and you can see, I don't want to give it too much away, but right after the plot twist happens, they have their camera on Chaney, you can see him going insane in about a 2 or 3 minute stretch where they just are showing him respond to this unfortunate plot twist, and he just grows visibly insane before your eyes, and leading to the climax of the movie. But it's put it this way: if you like freaks, you'll definitely like The Unknown, and you might like it even if you don't like freaks. It's a great, great movie.
It is a great movie, and he has to hide his arms because he was deformed. And remember, had 2 thumbs, and he had strangled somebody, so they were looking for a 2-thumb man.
Yep.
But there's
John Crawford's character saw somebody being strangled with 2 thumbs, but she couldn't see it was Lon Chaney's character because the rest of them was in some shade or something like that.
Well, we can bring it up.
It's awesome.
We can bring it up next week. But the twist of fate. If you can see it, it's free. You can go on YouTube. Anybody, the 1927 Lon Chaney, The Unknown, and it's one of his greatest roles. But they had an actual person that could do it. His act is he shoots a rifle with his feet. Now, for all the stuff Lon Chaney could do, he couldn't do that. So somebody else did it. But they do it so masterfully. The scene is amazing, where Joan Crawford is part of the act, and they're going around on this like what's it, merry-go-round, and he's shooting off her duds. Remember, he gets her down almost to her skivvies.
Yeah.
But it's just this. The thing was, you'd go to the theater, like the Stanford Theater where I saw it, and the audience would always be packed there. Remember the Stanford? And the audience is reacting like a audience would have reacted in the 20s. Sometimes they react like an audience of the 90s, where because of Holcomb or whatever. It depended on it depended on the day. But it was just amazing.
Yeah, if they showed any like 1940s technology, so you'd hear these smart snickers from the Stanford audience. But,
I remember Mona and I were watching Rebecca, and Mona was a friend of ours. God, she was pretty. I still think why didn't I marry her? But fate, right? You should see my face over that. But she turns to me and says to me, "What's wrong with Joan Fontaine's ass?" And I'm thinking, what does she mean? Joan Fontaine looks fine. Then I realized, because, I was born in the 50s, and American mothers born in the Depression always wore girdles, So she said she's wearing a girdle. And so that put that to rest, that issue. But, those things like that. Yeah, let's not.
I'm glad we got that cleared up.
Well, going to see a movie in the Castro, because I saw Vertigo first at Stanford, then I went to see it at the Castro. And, camp, they love camp. The Castro is up in the Castro Theater, folks, is in San Francisco's Castro district, the heart of what would have been, the gay community.
Yeah.
You don't even think of stuff like that.
I saw the Wild Bunch there. It was right when it was reissued, and another great cinema experience.
Yeah, but at the Castro, they'd really, Kim Novak is swaying her buns in some outrageous outfit from the 50s, which isn't outrageous in the context of the 50s, and people would start hooting and hollering and stuff.
Yeah.
But it was a different experience then, because you could only see these movies in these theaters, and you saw them with an audience. I first saw The Wild Bunch uncut at the Bleecker Street Theater in '83, and I realized I'm right. It is a masterpiece, because watching stuff uncut with the pan and scan. But getting back to Lon Chaney, who started becoming a star around 1919, the year after the Great War, played all these, for want of a better word, freaks. His characters were all often deformed, and he would go to extremities. Like in The Penalty, he'd lost his legs. So as an actor, he strapped his legs up and wore these leather type of, I don't even know what to call them, over his thighs. And, he'd be stomping around and stuff. And people loved them, because you have to understand, after the war, people came back. My father told me this was true when he was a kid. And in Paris, they're called mutilated de guerre, the mutilated from war. People there, they'd come back, Peter. My father said here in Manchester, there'd be a guy who's only had like half a body, and he'd be on a little platform with wheels,
Oh, yeah, sure.
Like
it was pretty grim,
People came back with horrible facial wounds that plastic surgery at the time could not handle. Plastic surgery came out of both the world wars, and by the 40s they had perfected some techniques. But, you saw people that were mutilated. My father's grandfather lost his arm on the railroad. He was a railroad brakeman, and, that was common then because you're between cars. So he lived the rest of his life without an arm, And, so people knew the side of this, but there was a visceral response to the horror of it. In a time where, we talk about the Wild Bunch, until Bonnie and Clyde and the Wild Bunch, you didn't see you saw people getting shot. You could Gatling gun an entire Sioux nation, and there's no blood, right? And
I'd not see a drop of blood.
Right. And, so Lon Chaney and Tod Browning Tod Browning would be something like almost a Steven Spielberg in a way, you know, not as big as Spielberg, of course, who was more like Cecil B. DeMille in his success, but somebody that was like a cutting-edge director of his time. We're talking about the early Spielberg, and making these movies that people just flock to, and which will the natural segue is into the Unholy Three, which they made, which Harry Earls was in. Do you want to talk about Harry? Brendan, can we see P3, the Doll Family? Do you have any? You have a crush on Daisy Earls, right?
Yeah.
Who's
yeah.
Over on the right, folks, next to the dog. She's got her sister Tiny and Grace. Harry is in the middle of the photo. Harry was about 3 feet tall. He was very tiny. And they got a dog. And there is Daisy Earls. So tell us about the Doll Family and the Earls.
Well, the Doll Family, they were family.
They were.
And, Daisy and Harry were brother and sister, I'm pretty sure.
Oh, yeah, they were.
And, Harry, I guess you would call him a pretty good actor.
When he was comprehensible.
He was very emotive, and, for a 3-foot-tall guy, he was, he had the monopoly on a lot of those roles. The trouble with him was he was incoherent a lot of times. He'd have this great dialogue, and, he'd say something, and you'd, turn to the person next to you and go, what the heck did he just say? And, nobody ever knew. But,
yeah, he was...
that didn't stop him from getting, all the plum little person roles throughout most of the 30s, at least.
Can we see P4, the other one of the Doll Family? This is with Tod Browning. It's actually a color shot. And there they are. Daisy, who's taller, is not in this shot because she was taller than Harry. Now, Harry Earls was born Kurt Schneider or something. They were Germans, and they came to America and made a career dancing and vaudeville, and I don't think they were sideshow performers. They didn't work in a freak show. They worked, they were in vaudeville when vaudeville was going, and they were known as dancers. In fact, most people have actually seen Harry Earls. He's one of the Lollipop Guild in The Wizard of Oz that are offering the lollipop to Dorothy, Judy Garland. And
that's right.
Yeah. So they were dancers, but he was German. He had a German accent, and like many little people, he had a high voice. And that didn't record very well, particularly like 19. He was a star of one of Tod Browning and Lon Chaney's greatest hits, The Unholy Three. Tell us about The Unholy Three of 1925, Peter.
Well, The Unholy Three was a great flick, great flick. It consisted of Lon Chaney, who was, I think he was ably bodied in this particular role. And Harry Earls is his sidekick.
Tweedledee.
And jeepers, now I'm looking.
Victor McLaglen, the Oscar winner.
On our third of The Unholy.
The strong man, Victor McLaglen.
The strong man, okay. And they were like, a criminal enterprise. They would, they were criminals. They were a team. And
how did they do?
A lot of times they would put Harry Earls on a baby carriage and and just push him around like he was a baby, and which was a problem because he had a penchant for cigars,
That's right. That's right. He's actually influenced in Roger Rabbit. Remember, there's the baby, and then you see him off screen. He's smoking a cigar and he's vulgar.
It's
Harry Earls liked to say obscene things.
Yeah, and that ended up being Lon Chaney's only talkie. Was the remake of The Unholy Three in 1930.
Right, in 25 they made Tod Browning made the original. It was a huge hit. Then talkies came in, and they did a 30. But Browning did not direct that. And instead of Victor McLaglen already had become actor, because his Irish-English, well, he's actually English. We always think of him as Irish because of all the Irish sergeants he played in John Ford films. But he was an Englishman who had actually fought Jack Johnson because he'd been the British Army heavyweight champ and got, the stuffing beaten out of him by the great black heavyweight, the first black heavyweight, to hold the title. And Victor McLaglen, they made the remake, and Lon Chaney actually had a voice. But unfortunately, he had throat cancer and he died. And that was a huge hit, too. The remake. Yeah. And Harry Earls repeated his role. Remember, as the baby and also we could do a whole thing on the Unholy Three. They cut that because, Harry Earls, they only have the picture of him with the little girl that he murders, and they had to cut that out of the scene. Remember, if you know the history of that. But to talk about freaks, and Victor McLaglen, they actually wanted to play the strong man, but he turned the role down. And we'll talk about the casting in a minute. This is at Freaks, getting to Freaks. Suddenly there's this big vogue for horror films, sound horror films. And MGM, Irving Thalberg, wants to recreate the magic that he had at Universal and brought with him to MGM with Lon Chaney. So there was a short story called Spurs about a midget in a sideshow whose wife cuckolds him, and he gets his revenge eventually, and she has to carry him everywhere, and he's wearing spurs. And the only remnant of that in the movie is, at the end of the wedding scene where she plays horsey with him.
Yeah, she puts him on her shoulders, and it's a complete humiliation in that particular scene.
And next week, when I take the stuff off of private listing, we can come back and show these. But it's good to talk about this first, because I was thinking about I'd already postponed the show a couple times because it's quite shocking, folks, when you actually see the footage of the freaks. Because instead of Lon Chaney, able-bodied person pretending he was a freak, these were the real thing. It reminds me, once again, going back to Mona, we watched The Reflections in a Golden Eye, and she really hadn't seen Brando because, she'd been born in Iran, came here as a kid, and sometime like in the 80, and Brando basically, was the size of the Goodyear blimp, and he'd only come into a movie every 10 years to collect that $8 million or something. So we're watching Reflections in a Golden Eye, where he replaced Monty Cliff and Croak. And it's one of his greatest.
Who would have been perfect in that role?
Right, because it's of a Brando of all people who plays a army major based on a Carson McCullers novel, who's a repressed homosexual, married to Liz Taylor, who's, irrepressible Liz Taylor. And I guess Marlon got a bit hot for her and had a fight with Richard Burton over her. But that's another story. And but it's considered one of his greatest performances, and it actually influenced Taxi Driver and the scene where Travis Bickle, played by the great Robert De Niro, who was Brando's true, successor, is the great actor. He looks in the mirror. That's based on Brando's characterization. So we're watching it. And then Mona just turns and says, I can't watch this anymore. I said, why? He says, there is nothing between me and him as an actor. There's just no artificiality, There's no distance. I'm actually watching this man break down. Because Brando was crying in the scene. He had been humiliated. He's lying on the ground crying. And she said, there's nothing between me and him. It's like actually watching somebody. Huston said that he was quite fascinating. John Huston, who directed it, great director, said he was the only actor who was a genius. And he was actually a very good horseman. But in the movie, he was a bad horseman. And Brando is a bad horseman as he's playing the character. He says he'd never seen anything like that. But, of course, Huston said casting makes your movie, He never told his actors what to do because he'd casted them. But, Yeah. Now get us back to Freaks, because I'm going off on one of my ADHD circles.
Yeah, well, I think the thing about Freaks was, when the people went to the movies the previous year to see Dracula and Frankenstein, there was obviously people were like made up heavily. And
you're
the
right.
thing I think that was shocking about Freaks when people went to see it was that it was so obvious. These people aren't made up at all. I mean, this is the real thing. And so what happened is,
people got sick.
I remember hearing about a preview in San Diego before the general release in Freaks, and people were like literally ran out of the theater screaming. It was a disaster, the pre-release screening, and I think after that they brought it back, to the studio to see if they could make it less terrifying without losing its edge, but. What eventually happened was it was basically way too much for early 30s audiences to handle.
Right. Ironically, San Diego, Irving Thalberg was one of the first people that would take a film out and show it to an audience and then recut it. He was famous for recutting films. And even he was shocked by what he got. From the script on, he was just shocked. But, it's a gamble. So the irony of the San Diego is people were running out. They were getting physically sick. And it played like 2 weeks sold out. But other people, they knew that it wouldn't play outside of San Diego, where you got all those sailors and Marines. Probably saw worse. But, Peter...
And you can't buy publicity like that,
It's interesting. Boris Karloff is in a movie with Charles Laughton and all these famous actors where he plays a servant. It's a haunted house movie, and it's got all these great actors in it. And, kind of...
The Old Dark House.
It's not The Old Dark House, I don't... And Charles Laughton's in it. And they actually, at the beginning of the film, say that Boris Karloff is an actor. And that this isn't what he looks like, but he's an amazing actor. They don't say that he's like the successor to Lon Chaney. But I guess people in Frankenstein, they were watching him in these roles. And they thought, oh, my God, this, they actually were, this is him. I'll try to find that clip.
Where'd they find this guy?
And so it is strange because, people do think of actors as, their roles, I guess. People think John Wayne was John Wayne. Maybe he was or not. My father didn't like him because he was a draft dodger. But getting back to, we're going to, now, folks, hold on to your socks. Although, I shouldn't. That brings up a saying in the Army we don't want to repeat. We're going to show you some of the folks. The doll family, a midget is not a dwarf. A dwarf is not properly anatomically correct. Here, they're just tiny. He was like 3 feet tall. And a dwarf, has abnormalities in their bodies, but in a freak show, a midget is at the height of, there's a caste system, and which ends with it ends with a geek. We've got to do, the Tyrone Power movie too.
Nightmare Alley.
What a masterpiece that is. Tyrone Power, with the most handsome man, reduced to a sideshow geek. Boy, but he had some.
Guy died tragically young.
Oh, he died at 44 with a heart attack.
Yeah. But yeah, well, in Freaks,
I'm going to show.
When Johnny Eck shows up, there's no mistaking Johnny Eck for some sort of special effect.
We'll talk about.
It's just like.
Yeah, we'll talk.
It was so there, right in front of you.
Johnny Eck.
I'm sure you'll get to Johnny.
We'll do that next week because I don't have any photos. We're going to show now. The first one is P5, Prince Randian, who you call Sausage Man, and was called the Human Caterpillar. Prince Randian was a person that was born in, I think, Trinidad without arms and legs. And he was a sideshow attraction for most of his life. Back then, folks, there was no welfare. If your parents didn't kill you, they sold you to the circus. The Hilton sisters, who were Siamese twins, they're sold, literally sold. Yet Prince Randian, I tell you, when you start, I didn't see Freaks. Yeah, I had seen Freaks before I saw you. Up in Goffstown, well, the end of Pinardville, which is where Shaw's used to be. There used to be a video store, and I rented Freaks. This is going to be my first showing. Start watching it. Somebody had taped over Saturday Night Live on it. And when I took it back, the girl was so pretty, she was like heartbroken when I told her about it. So that ended any chance of me getting a date. Besides my being only a little taller than Harry Earls. But
at least you're more coherent. Usually.
Yeah, well, he could be. There's why Peter's bringing that up. There's a famous quote by Leonard Maltin, who was quite a big movie reviewer on Entertainment Tonight. And what did he say about Harry Earls in his talkie debut in the 1930 remake of The Unholy Three, Peter?
Unholy Three. Yeah, he closed his little capsule review with, "The midget Earls is largely incoherent."
I think it's incomprehensible, but yeah, he could be that. And when we show the clip next week of Prince Randian knew 4 languages, but I guess he was incomprehensible in all of them too. Can we see P6, Prince Randian and his wife? He was able to speak Hindi, French, English, and German. And he was said to have a great sense of humor, which helped him find a loving wife with whom he had 4 children. That's a mistake, 5. And his wife is normal sized. He was actually of Indian, from the Indian subcontinent, his ethnicity, because Indians became indentured servants all through the Caribbean and South Africa too, where they were just a step up from chattel slaves. And he did have 4 children. On the set of Freaks, one of his sons moved them around. And we don't have, next week we'll show you how his means of locomotion, and which is startling to say the least. When I finally saw the movie on a big screen, I mean, watching the movie and seeing Prince Randian, even from that opening scene where they're in the Glen and Prince Randian and the dog-faced girl are moving around.
With the little children.
Oh, my God. It's like the stuff of nightmares. What Prince Randian...
Well, let me tell you, because a little postscript to your Prince Randian story is that I saw Freaks with when I was in California with my girlfriend at the time, and when I told her that Sausage Man, Prince Randian, actually had fathered 4 children, she told me later on that, I've had nightmares for like weeks ever since you told me that, Prince Randian fathered children. It really traumatized her. So that's an entertaining little side bit for you there.
Well, I did have a... go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, and I guess if I'm a woman and I'm looking at Prince Randian and I'm just imagining, the horrors that would be associated with that, I could probably be traumatized too.
Well, Frank Sinatra left his wife for Ava Gardner, who at the time was one of the most beautiful women in the world. And that's actually a plot point in the novel The Godfather. And it's in the movie, too. And once again, John Huston asked her, "What do you see in Frank?" Because Frank was 5'8", and weighed about 140 pounds. And she said, he only weighs 140 pounds, but 70 pounds of that is
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
this is a family hour and that. In fact, I have the clip, and we'll show it next week, of Harry Earls in both the silent and sound version of the Unholy Three, where he's being displayed as Tweedledee, the 20 inches tall, 20 pounds, the most perfect human. And there's the French women, because it takes place, yeah. Freaks actually supposed to take place in Paris. I only realized that, after watching it again. But these two women look at him after they're saying he's 20 pounds. And they change the dialogue in the Saw movie to say he's most of it brains, which they don't have in the silent movie. But it's understood these two women are looking at him, and they call him a demitasse, which is like a half coffee, a half cup of coffee. Oh, and he goes berserk at it. But you know what? They're measuring up just how many pounds of that are.
Yeah.
And that's when I have in the background the one of the these were lobby cards, Freaks, the story of the love life of the sideshow. And the premiere, they've got 3 photos fanned in the top. They've got a clown talking to the Hilton sisters, and then there's Joseph and Josephine, and then there's Harry Earls and Cleopatra, the Amazonian trapeze artist. And it says, "Can a fully grown woman truly love a midget?" Which you've been to Hollywood as I have, and that stereotype of a producer of about 5.5 feet tall with some spectacular looking girl about 6 feet tall is actually true. So, maybe it was it resonated in Hollywood.
It's the Harvey Weinstein story,
Yeah. Yeah. They got Johnny Eck on there too, but we'll show you Johnny Eck next week. But Sausage Man used to. They called him Caterpillar Man, and the living torso. He on the set of Freaks, he used to hide under the wagons that the performers live in the movie, which were part of the set. And he used to hide under them. Then he would waddle out and let out these blood-curdling screams, which put people's... But, about Freaks, the original casting was they wanted Victor McLaglen as the strong man, and he turned it down. They wanted Jean Harlow as Venus, the SEAL trainer. And they wanted Myrna Loy, who was on her way up, and by 1938 she'd be one of the top 10 box office stars, the most popular woman star, as Cleopatra, and she was horrified. She was only 21 years old, and she had always.
Thank God she decided to skip out on that. I mean, Myrna Loy. I mean, she's kind of delicate. I think that might have ended her career.
It ended a lot of people's careers.
Yeah.
It eventually it all but ended Tod Browning as a force that could get his own pictures made. The only major movie he made after that was 36, The Devil Doll, and that was hoked up. The ending was, it couldn't be like he wanted. But there were different times, right? A lot of people said he just could not adapt to dialogue pictures, but this virtually ended his career. And we got about 6 minutes or so. So we're going to show want to see. Yeah, I got to get my photos. Do we have a photo of Schlitzie? No, we got the Hilton Sisters. And this is made for you. Here it is. I got a lovely shot of the Hilton Sisters when they were young. The Hilton Sisters were fused at the pelvis, so their buttocks were joined. And at the time they were born, like 1908, you could not do surgery like that. They would have died one or both of them. And so they were illegitimate offspring of a barmaid who then sold them to somebody for, several pounds because they were born in England. And they were kept until they were 21, being beaten and abused and exhibited as a sideshow. But the person that owned them, and when the person died, she actually bequeathed them in the will to her daughter. They'd moved to the States, San Antonio. She had trained them to be proficient musicians. And can we see the other one where they're so cute? P8. Oh, I got a close-up of them. The only thing that's wrong is, they have the teeth that English people do, They must have had Coca-Cola back then, too. Oh, they are lovely. I'm just thinking of Geek Love, a great novel that we can't talk about because of certain plot points. And I tell you, Peter, I would have tried to marry them. Why couldn't they get married though? They had. Do you know the story about them trying to get married?
I think it was a plot point in Chained for Life, which was like almost biographical. But I think some like goody two-shoes judge didn't want was afraid of something involving
bigamy,
more than two people in the privacy of their own homes. It's sad, but what else are they going to do?
Hey, can you put back one of the pictures of the Hilton Sisters? Let's try P7. We'll leave that first because I got to tell a story. The thing was, they allegedly went to 23 states and were turned down every time. And each sister married a guy in a sham marriage who was gay, they say. And that only lasted, might have been another performer or something, that lasted only a bit. Here's the famous story. Scott Fitzgerald wrote a story, Crazy Sunday, when he was at MGM, picking up extra cash to, fuel his alcoholism and Zelda's zaniness. So he's there. And the story is he walks into the commissary, and the Hilton Sisters are there, and one is reading the menu, and they were like catty corner to each other. They could face you by craning their necks, but they looked off in different directions. So Scott Fitzgerald's there with them. One of them is reading the menu, and the other one seemingly understands what she's reading. And it's a cafeteria at MGM. The stuff changes, daily or whatever. Yeah. And they say he was probably drunk, even at noontime. He got so upset, he got sick, and he had to run out of the commissary. And when Louis B. Mayer found out that this movie was being made, he tried to shut it down. But, Irving Thalberg had a lot of clout. He was virtually, he was number 2 at the studio, but he was actually like co-number 1. And they made all from the beginning when they started coming to the commissary, they made all the freaks go and eat in their own tent. But they did allow the Harry Earls and Daisy to eat, and they did allow the Hilton Sisters in. And he wrote a story about Crazy Sunday is about MGM, a studio making a circus picture. But I guess, as you'll see in the film next week, if one of them closed the eyes and you touch the other one, she felt. And one of the plot points is one of the sisters got married to the stuttering clown who doesn't like the other sister. And then the sister that isn't married has a fiance who's a handsome Valentino type. And so he's there kissing, I can't remember if it's Violet that he's kissing. And it
doesn't matter.
And the other twin is just, she's feeling it.
Yeah, I know. She's getting into it too.
I swear,
it's great. I mean, the possibilities there are endless. And another movie could have taken much more advantage of it. I'm thinking of can you imagine like David Lynch or Guy Madden directing a Hilton Sisters movie these days? The imagination just throbs.
I'm surprised he didn't. He probably just didn't get a good script.
Yeah.
But I would marry the Hilton Sisters. When they were young, they were quite fetching. Think about the possibilities. Yeah, but there's some things. It's like the Charles Bukowski story, Love at 1750, where he falls in love with a mannequin at the junk store and takes it home and starts, having relations with it. And he falls, and I remember he says he'd fallen in love with it, and then he said, I am insane, aren't I? Because it's, his girlfriend is frankly a bitch that he doesn't like. And I'll never forget we're going to wrap it up, the line of dialogue. He said, in some ways, a fake woman was better than a real woman. She didn't want to go out to the movies or dancing. She didn't ask for a color TV or a new car. And she never had any monthlies. That's the word he used. But there were arguments. Because, the character is insane, and he has these arguments with her inside his head. And he says, but there be arguments. There always were arguments, even with an artificial woman. And, you'd be bitched at twice as much, but only one mother-in-law. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, hopefully you'll be free and we'll come back and we'll actually watch the movie. But I have to warn you, folks, we've watched it many times and you just grow very fond of the people and their dignity. But they are shocking to look at. So we're going to say goodbye now and come back next week and we'll finish our presentation about one of the greatest movies ever made, Freaks, which is in the National Register of Historical Films. That's how significant it was. Take care, Peter.
Yes, it is.
Talk to you later.
Yes.
Bye, folks.
I will talk to you later.